welcome to Landscaping Southwest Television. I'm Kristine Cornils, and we're going to show you how to transform your property into a beautiful oasis of outdoor living.
The Southwest region is unique with its extreme temperature changes, the abundant sunshine, and limited rainfall. Therefore, landscaping can be somewhat more challenging in this area than in other wetter regions of the United States. So on this show, we will be talking with experts who are experienced in successfully landscaping the Southwest. We want to help you create that beautiful outdoor space you've been dreaming about. Join us today on Landscaping Southwest.
Well, we're so glad you're with us on this episode of Landscaping Southwest. We get a chance to talk to Wes Brittenham of Plants of the Southwest. Wes, thanks so much for joining us again.
Sure, thank you. Thanks.
Yeah, and Wes was with us on a previous episode where we learned about winterizing your yard and also preparing for spring. It had some really useful tips. So if you didn't get a chance to see that, please go to our website, landscapingsouthwest.com. And today, Wes is going to share with us the principles of Xeriscape. Okay, you have to help me. How do you pronounce it? What is this I'm trying to say?
Xeriscape. Xeriscape. It's from the Greek xeri for dry and scapes for landscape. Not xeroscape, which some people say because that refers to strictly gravel and stone and a bunch of nothing.
Things that aren't that pretty, really.
Not that pretty. Maybe don't use a lot of water, but a xeriscape is a water-conserving landscape that can be as lush and beautiful as you require for your design or the use of your landscape.
So and where did these principles come from?
Well, I think it started up in Denver when they were looking at a water conservation program. They coined the word Xeriscape at the Denver Water Authority.
Oh, okay.
It made its way down into New Mexico in probably the late 80s and really caught on in the early to mid 90s, and now it's just sort of a common practice.
So what did we do in New Mexico before that?
Well, because we're a city, certainly here in Albuquerque, of people from all over the place. People wanted to bring the plants that they were used to. If they came from the Midwest or the East Coast, that was what they wanted to see. It doesn't work so well. We start out with expanses of bluegrass and all sorts of trees and shrubs.
Bluegrass requires a lot of water.
40 inches of water a year. Yeah,
oh,
you have
goodness.
to water it constantly to keep
much more
it.
than we get here.
Yeah, you can get away with 10 inches or less on something like blue grama. So somewhere in the late 80s, early 90s, we realized we weren't sitting on Lake Superior, and people started talking about utilizing native plants or really well-adapted plants in a more xeric design concept.
Right, so you think it is possible to have a beautiful yard, a beautiful landscape, and still adhere to those principles?
Oh, sure, yeah. There are many plants, whether they're perennials, shrubs, trees that flower, that have color, seasonal interest, bring in butterflies, hummingbirds. So you can have all of this, but with a really low water use landscape.
Yeah, okay. And if you could share with us a little bit, we're here at Plants of the Southwest. What do you have here to offer to customers?
Well, we work with a lot of native plants, probably predominantly more native than most other nurseries, but we also sell a lot of adaptive plants, plants that maybe aren't native to New Mexico but have proved very well suited to our extremes of heat, our extremes of cold, and our lack of precipitation.
Okay, great. Well, I'm excited because when we come back, Wes is going to share with us those principles he was talking about, so that when you're planning and preparing for your yard and your landscaping, that you can consider those principles and have something that's beautiful as well.
Yeah.
So we'll be right back.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Well, I am holding an Oya, which is an ancient form of irrigation. It's a clever way to conserve water, and John Bolton of East Central Ministries is going to explain to us what is an Oya and how does it work?
So it's porous clay. We fire it without any glaze and just get the right setting so that water will sweat through it. Once you fill it with water, water will sweat through to the roots of your plants.
And how often do you have to refill it?
Roughly 24 to 48 hours for the water to drop through.
Okay. Can you show us actually an Oya in action?
Sure. So we just planted these the other day. This is one that we just put in.
I can see it's all wet around here.
It is. So we filled it with water about a day and a half ago. So we buried the Oya about 3/4. We're kind of up to the neck, so that the neck is exposed for easy access of pouring water into it.
Great. Well, thank you, John. And you can get more information about how to use Oyas and how you can use it in your yard at landscapingsouthwest.com.
Back with Wes Brittenham of Plants of the Southwest, and Wes has offered to share with us the principles of xeriscaping, and what are those principles?
Well, there are 7 of them, and just to run down the list, we start with planning and design. We have soil amendments or improvements, appropriate turf areas, appropriate irrigation, mulching, and then maintenance, proper maintenance. So each one of these we can embellish on.
Okay, yeah, that'd be great. Yeah, so let's start with the first one, so planning and design.
So planning and design, you want to think about the use, the function of your yard. What is it that you're actually trying to accomplish? I think first I would say that there are 3 zones in a xeriscape. There's an oasis zone near the house, a transition zone a little bit further out, and then the xeric zone or the driest zone the further out. So you group plants according to their water needs and then how you're going to use the space. Plants that require more water you would want closer to the house. If you have a turf area, if you want a garden, something a little lusher, keep it near the patio, keep it close, keep it cool. It helps to cool down the house to have an oasis zone up close. The middle area, the transition area, would be, some of the more moderate water use plants transitioning into the lower water use plants. Then beyond that, the third and outermost zone would be the xeric zone. That would be where your hottest, driest, lower water use plants would be located.
Great. Okay, and principle number 2?
Number 2 would be soil improvements or amendments and whether or not they're necessary. For the most part, with xeric or native plants, you don't need to amend the soil. But if you're doing a vegetable garden or an intensive flower bed, you might want to amend with compost or something like that. Also, it varies from area of the city. On the west side of the river where it's quite sandy, you may need a soil amendment more so than you would in the river valley or in the heights.
So you really do have to think about a lot of not only the principles, but how they apply to your unique location.
Site. And then appropriate turf areas would be the third one. I think we got into this because everybody in the old days had big old lawns and mowed them and fertilized them and watered them like crazy. And if you don't need a lawn, why have one? Maybe if you have children or you just want that green space, smaller is better, and then species of grass changes. Bluegrass, we discussed, uses a lot more water. Fescues and rye, other typical park-type blends, still are pretty thirsty, but you can have a lovely lawn with like buffalo grass or blue grama or a combination of the two, which can use a third the amount of water. But again, if it's a lawn, make it as the smallest that it needs to be to serve the function.
Right, okay, great.
And so we can talk about low water use plants. That would be the next thing in the landscape. Certainly you might have some that are in the moderate range or even the high water use range up in your oasis zone. Xeriscape can be entirely xeric and native with cactus, yucca, and things like that, but most of us need a little more. But in general, you should kind of try to use plants that are appropriate to our rainfall with some supplemental irrigation. You're pretty much going to have to water anything you put in, but the lower water use plant you select, the less you're going to have to be worried about taking care of it as water becomes a more serious issue in the future.
Right, okay, so that's 4 principles. Okay, what's the 5th one?
The 5th would be efficient irrigation, and certainly for most landscape, that would be drip irrigation. Lawns need spray irrigation, pop-up sprinkler heads, but those are specific to lawn use only. When it comes to trees, shrubs, and even perennials, drip irrigation is by far the most efficient because you can apply exactly the amount of water in rates that most people would refer to as gallons per hour. So for example, a butterfly bush might want 4 gallons per hour, but a penstemon might want 1 gallon per hour. So you can put the appropriate emitter on each individual plant run your timer for an hour. The one that wants more water gets more water. The one that wants less gets less. So you don't have to have so many valves for, each separate kind of plant. Just by grouping or installing the appropriate emitter, you can water everything effectively. Drip itself, I call Tinker Toys.
Oh, you do?
Yeah, it all fits together. It's compression fittings. There's little tools that poke holes. You can just plug the emitters right into the poly and into the spaghetti. So really, after a little bit of minimal training, anybody can do drip.
Wow.
The main thing to know is the appropriate water for each specific plant. So, and then mulching. Now, the mantra for myself here is mulch and water. Mulch and water are the most important things we can do. So we've kind of covered briefly directing the appropriate water to plants, but mulch is critical here. The sun beats down on the soil, raises the temperatures, causes evaporation. So mulch is basically anything that's on the surface of the ground. And mulches, to be effective, should be a good 3 to 4 inches thick, and it can be an organic mulch like bark, pecan shells, wood chips, something like that, or even crusher fines and gravels have their place. Again, it would be based on the plant material. The oasis plants might like a more woodsy mulch. The deserty plants might do better in a crusher fine or gravel mulch. So again, within your design, you would apply mulches appropriately to the plant material the same way you would apply irrigation. So they all kind of tie together.
Right, okay. Yeah, it's a lot to think about, but it's also kind of every time we go to work in the yard, we probably should be recognizing that your small decision actually is part of this larger context.
Everything, they're all part of the big picture.
Sure.
And what you're trying to do, hopefully, in the last principle that we'll talk about is proper maintenance.
Okay.
A lot of people think, well, native plants, low water is low maintenance or no maintenance. Depending on your design and your selection, it certainly could be that. But when you're planning your design, you go from principle number 1 to number 7. How much time do I want to commit? How much time do I have to commit to taking care of this landscape? And then you can choose accordingly. All landscapes need some maintenance. The more minimal, the more absolutely xeric, the least maintenance. So you just plan that in there too. Everything needs maintenance. Most xeriscapes, one good cleanup in the spring and one good cleanup in the fall with a little deadheading and a little tidying up in between is basically all they need when they're established.
Great. Okay. Well, Wes, thank you so much. And when we come back, Wes is going to share with us more about the first principle, which is planning and design. So stay with us. We'll be right back. Yeah, great. Okay. Yeah. Well, the Water Conservation Officer, Catherine Uhas, is willing to share with us one of their special rebates. It has to do with the rainwater harvesting program. Catherine, what is that program?
Well, it's a credit on your water bill for putting in rain barrels, and it depends on the volume of the barrel how much money we're going to give you back on your bill. So we start off at $25 for just a standard rain barrel, but as you get more and more of them or bigger barrels, the rebate goes up. But we're looking at a program that's an even bigger expansion of that.
Oh, you are?
Yeah.
What is that?
Well, it's the Rainwater Harvesting Pilot Program. And we're actually putting in rainwater harvesting systems at our customers' homes so that we could capture as much as 1,000, 2,000 gallons of water.
So actually doing something that's larger, that would fill up over probably multiple storms, I guess.
Exactly, yes.
Okay.
So that you could water for several months after a rainstorm rather than just, the next day.
Okay, so and if a person is interested in this rebate, do they need to talk to you before they purchase the barrel? What do you recommend?
No, you can just go on our website and get the rebate form, purchase it anywhere you want, online, in town, whatever appeals to you, and then you send in a copy of your receipt and the rebate form, and the credit goes on your bill. It's pretty seamless.
That's great. Well, if you haven't taken advantage of that rebate, please consider it. It sounds like a wonderful program. Thank you, Catherine.
Thank you.
Thank you. Talk to you more about the first principle of xeriscaping, the planning and design. And
Sure.
Looks like you've got some designs that we can talk through of actual yards that you've worked on. But even before you put pen to paper, what do you have to do in that planning and design
Sure.
phase?
The first question I would be asking again is, how do you want to utilize the space? What is it you're trying to accomplish? What is your budget? Are you going to do it yourself, or are you going to hire a designer or a company to install it? So I always tell people to take your time time. You know, get to know the space, the hot spots, the sunny, dry spots, the shady spots, the prevailing wind, how you'll use the space. What are your views? Looking out the kitchen window, do you have, you know, a bench on a porch? Is there a view that you never want to block, the sunset on the mountains, or maybe the neighbor has an RV or an ugly shed that you want to screen? Maybe you learn that the wind always comes from this direction, you'd like to diffuse that. So I always ask people to take a little bit of time and just observe their own space, and then that can indicate, I need a tree that turns orange in the fall over there, I'd like some grasses, you know, for some movement over here, and just kind of create it. It's really fun to do.
I imagine it would be. So it really sounds like you encourage people to be outside at different times of the day,
yeah,
different
seasons,
different seasons too.
Yeah,
and almost just taking notes, I guess,
sure,
when they observe something that they like or don't like.
Yeah, never rush into anything, because it's easy to make a mistake through accidental ignorance. You know, we all, I still do it. You know, I fall in love with the plant and I'll put it where I probably know it shouldn't be.
Yeah.
And that's one thing, the right plant in the right place. So it is worth taking your time to plan out the design.
And I imagine thinking about the uses as well, that there's probably a lot of uses for the yards that we may not think of right away.
Yeah.
But if we actually took the time to ponder, even like a vegetable garden, some of us might not have thought of that as being part of something they consider for the yard.
Like for example, in our yard we have a great vegetable and herb garden right outside the kitchen door and right next to the barbecue grill.
Oh, perfect.
So when we're making dinner, we just have to step out the back door and pinch some fresh herbs, or you know, stuff the chicken, put it on the rotisserie, and it's very conveniently placed.
Sure.
Some people, though, for their the sun requirements of vegetables and herbs, maybe they don't have that ability, and perhaps their vegetable garden, herb garden has to be situated a little further away.
Right.
So, you know, it just depends on the individual site.
Okay. And what about the slope of the yard too? What sort of things do we need to be thinking about?
Well, you can do all sorts of things. Certainly you want to be sure that you have good drainage, and the drainage is for the most part away from the building.
Okay.
But for example, again, using my yard, it slopes gently from, what would that be, the southeast to the northwest, and so I'm able to harvest water off of patios, off of pathways. So each lower area in my landscape benefits not only from the appropriate drip that's been installed, but also in rain events or precipitation, the water flows. I have lots of permeable surfaces, so I'm harvesting water into the landscapes to minimize the water that I have to apply.
Which is very helpful towards that
yeah.
water conservation. Well, so what did these customers ask for from you?
Well, these were a couple of interesting, both were single older women that were retired. So for example, this one lives on the west side. She didn't need a lawn, so there's no turf area, not even native grasses, but she does like grasses.
And this is a backyard?
This is a backyard.
Okay.
So this is out on the west mesa. It's facing sort of northwest. So she has a covered patio that has drainage issues. The canales take the water from the roof and out into her landscape. So we created a dry riverbed to run through the landscape that the water can be harvested into, which supplements the irrigation of things like rosemary and lavender and cherry sage and ornamental grasses. So she has a lot of color, some evergreen, some fragrance, some movement. She wanted a small vegetable bed, so the only soil amendments were actually in a raised bed that has some bench seating so that she can sit down when she's gardening. And again, it's placed adjacent to her barbecue grill. It's you know, some simple crusher fine mulches around the outside with very xeric plants at the edge.
So this is kind of thinking back to when we were talking earlier. This is like the oasis zone.
Yeah, it's a little more densely planted
zone, I guess. Great. Okay. Well, Wes, thank you so much for sharing with us. I hope you picked up some tips as you plan to design your yard. And please remember too, as Wes was recommending, you know, take that time to deciding, you know, what do you want to use your yard for, and also the characteristics of it, the different seasons and the sun and the wind. So, well, thank you, Wes, and we'll be right back on Landscaping Southwest.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Jill Brown, and I'm your landscape coach for Landscaping Southwest TV. And today I wanted to talk to you about weeds and provide you a few tips about those pesky weeds that we have here in the Southwest. They are inevitable and they make gardening frustrating. And so there's a few ways I can help you guys out with our weeds. In the springtime, you'll see we'll get these mustard weeds. We have a few other different ones around here. Now, one of the most popular things to do for weeds is to hit them with chemicals, but I don't recommend that. Really, we need to be pulling these weeds by hand, and then later in the next seasons, we can prevent them. But the chemicals, if we spray them with chemicals, then we're just gonna have to come back and clean them up after that. And the chemicals aren't really great for our environment. We have a simple tool here. This allows us to dig down in and pull those weeds up. One of the best times to pull weeds is right after a rain. And you'll be getting these weeds here in the springtime. You use this tool and you can pull them up by the root. You want to always make sure that you get that root so that that prevents future weeds from coming. And then never put this in your compost bin. This goes in the trash. If we put it in our compost bin, it might not heat up enough to kill the weed seeds, and we'll get more weeds when we put that compost on our plants. This tool allows you to easily grab the weeds and their roots just by dragging it through the ground. And it lets you get a large area of weeds pulled at one time. Just using this simple motion. You go back in, and there you have it. You just pull those and toss them. And that's your weed tip for today.
You shared with us some great tips for planning and design. Do you have any tips kind of for the beginner landscape designer?
Sure.
Yeah.
So I think the first thing, again, to reiterate, just familiarizing yourself with the property, the views, the light, etc. But I think there's some really go-to plants for any xeriscape that would be nearly indestructible for most people.
Oh, and that would be great. Yeah, what are those?
For tree forms, you could do things like desert willow, the New Mexico olive, or a vitex. Those are large shrub, small tree kind of thing. And then you could use things like red yucca in combination with blue mist caryopteris or Russian sage or autumn sage for some red-blue combinations, maybe a little lavender in there for some purple.
Okay.
And then with wildflowers like gaillardia or penstemons for some reds and oranges and yellows. So there are a lot of really easy plants to work with.
So, and if these names are flying by us so quickly, how can someone find more information about these different types of plants?
They can come to visit us here at the nursery. We're at 6680 4th Street. We're just about 2 blocks
in
north
Albuquerque?
of Osuna. Technically the village of Los Ranchos, but we're in Albuquerque.
Sure, okay.
And our phone number is 344-8830. Our email here is, unfortunately I didn't abbreviate, plantsofthesouthwestabq@gmail.com.
Okay.
And then we have a Facebook page, Plants of the Southwest Albuquerque on Facebook. And there we post a lot of pictures about what's happening in the garden now, what wildlife we're looking at, what bugs are out, sort of watering tips, planting tips, and we can have more of a dialogue through Facebook. It makes it really easy.
So kind of a community, people can get tips or ideas that they might not even have thought about.
Yeah.
Okay.
And we, get requests to identify plants or help them with this tough area, so we're very comfortable with that, yeah.
Great, okay. Well, thank you so much, Wes. And I did want to ask you too, have you been seeing the xeriscaping principles being applied more consciously here in Albuquerque and in New Mexico?
More consciously and more commonly.
Okay.
It used to be an odd thing, the margin was doing that. Now it's just very typical that communities...
It's a standard way people
people are conscious of their water use. They're super conscious of the availability or lack thereof of water, and so that makes the xeriscape principles something that really helps people to apply sensible design to their landscape and reduce their need for water, for pesticides, for a lot of things. You can actually save a lot of money doing xeriscape. And there are rebates that the city offers as well. So.
Oh, that's right. With the the Bernalillo Albuquerque Water Utility Authority.
Yeah. So you can check with them for rebates on water harvesting, on planting trees, on removing expensive bluegrass and replacing it with xeric plants. So there are ways to get rebates on.
So it really can be beneficial in so many different ways.
A lot of ways. And maybe you can hear the birds' habitat. When you have diversity of native plants, you bring in all sorts of nature right to your own backyard.
Great.
Which is a great thing.
Well, Wes, thank you so much. It's such a delight having you on the show.
Thank you so much.
So glad you were with us on this episode of Landscaping Southwest. Please join us next time as we help you transform your property into a beautiful oasis of outdoor living. See you next time. Yeah, great. Thank you.
I'm glad we could hear the little birds.
Yeah, that was fun. The goal is to make you laugh, Kyle.
Yeah.
Then you have to shake that now.
Oh, man, you should see the